I think there's like two kind of broad categories of automation. One is API-based automation. And then there's another type of automation that is what's called like robotic process automation is the industry name for RPA. It's basically keyboard and mouse automation, if you want to think about them. And they have like pros and cons. The API-based automation, this is what Zapier does. It's very permission-oriented, right? You have to go get API keys, but it's also way more reliable. The API space is much smaller, so it's simpler to create automations over. And this is why Zapier, without any AI to date, was able to sort of get as many users as we did. The downsides of it are that the API is limited. And this is where RPA kind of like gets, potentially exciting. Just due to the sort of nature of the technology, without any AI, it tends to be very hard to set up because you have to literally follow my mouse and keyboard and copy this sequence of patterns. And so I think that's why generally Zapier and the API-based has sort of won the day so far. Now, importantly, I've sort of described the world without AI. I do think that this RPA-based sort of future is a much better one if we can figure out how to get it to work, because you get anything that a sort of human could do with a given piece of software. My belief today is that we need weak forms of AGI in order to get the reliability and the setup ease of use high enough on, let's call it the RPA style of automation, in order to bring consumer products to market on that. But certainly within the realm of possibility now. But the full version I think we all want, can work with any app, learn anything I can give it.
All right, so my guest today is Mike Knoop, co-founder of Zapier. Mike led Zapier's push into AI agents that can automate daily tasks. And he also recently founded the Art Prize to accelerate development of open AGI. So welcome, Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Excited to chat about AI here today.
Yeah. So let's talk about Zapier first. For people who are not familiar, can you describe what a Zap is and why AI might be a great fit?
Yeah, Zapier is an automation platform. Our sort of mission is to put automation in the hands of everyone, including non-technical folks. So folks who don't know how to code, aren't an engineer, developer. In fact, indeed, that's the majority of Zapier users are just line of business folks, marketing, sales, support, product management, design, being able to learn and figure out how to use Zapier to automate workflows that they use between a lot of the apps that they use day to day. And one of the things that I started realizing a couple of years ago as I was getting into AI is that sort of the promise of automation and AI are kind of the same thing, actually. It's both the desire for computers just to do more work for us, right? So we don't have to do the grunt work and do the lame kind of grindy work that, a lot of our jobs sort of entail. And once I realized that that's, both why our best users love Zapier and also why people are so enamored and love and the promise and dreams of AI, it's the same thing. And so, I think I sort of realized, Zapier is an AI company. It might not know it yet, but it is.
Yeah. And I wrote this whole blog post on Zapier AI because I really believe after you learn how to use Claude and ChatGPT, I feel Zapier is the next tool you should really learn how to use because, it can actually do work for you when you're not there. With ChatGPT, I still have to talk to it all the time. Let's talk about how you led the push of Zapier AI or just AI in general inside the company in the first place. How did you get people to even start using AI stuff? Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess it sort of, the genesis goes back to my time in college. I did mechanical engineering, sort of focused on doing finite element analysis and optimization. Imagine sort of trying to optimize the structure of a race car to optimize weight versus performance. And it turned out, and I didn't know this at the time, but all the math that you need in order to be really good at that, modeling those types of systems software, it's all linear algebra and statistics. It's the exact same math that underlies deep learning. And so when I sort of realized that maybe 2015, 2016, I got kind of into AI, but mostly as a curiosity. I had a day job at Zapier. That was my main focus, but I paid attention to a lot of the developments in deep learning and sort of the language model stuff. And so I kind of, had been paying attention to GPT-2 and then 3 when it came out. Heck, I remember giving a whole presentation at an all hands at Zapier on how cool GPT-3 was and how it worked and trying to get people figuring out use cases for it. And, I feel I had a pretty good model of what these large language models could do and what they couldn't do. And then in January 2022, there was the original chain of thought paper, the sort of let's think step by step paper got published. And I read that, and all these reasoning benchmarks that people had created to test language models were all spiking based on this technique from, 30% accuracy up to 70 or 80% accuracy. And that was my sort of first whoa moment of, hey, this stuff can do something that I didn't price in to what I thought it could do. And that has a really material impact, both from like Zapier customer perspective on automation, but also just like as a human, like I'm curious, like shoot, if we're on path for, artificial general intelligence in a short timeline, like I want to know that. And I would like to do what I can to make that happen because I think there's a lot of benefit from that. And so that I gave still an exec at Zapier. I was running half the company, all product engineering reporting up to me. And fortunately, Zapier has multiple co-founders, and I was able to give it all back over to Wade. I said, Wade, you got to run this so that I can go just be an AI researcher. I think it's the most important thing I can do here at this point. And fortunately, he said yes. And so that's what I basically did for the next 6 months, 12 months. Me and my other co-founder, Brian, is the CTO. We just wrote code pretty much all day, trying to prototype with these like language model products to kind of get a sense of what they could do, what they couldn't do. And the very first thing we identified, and this was, remember, like summer 2022, so before even ChatGPT came out, we had sort of found that like tool use was one of the most important things that Zapier felt like we could like help out with, because Zapier has a lot of tools, right? All the integrations on Zapier, you could think of those tools, all the actions. And like these language models were frozen in time, right? Because they were sort of frozen from a training perspective on their weights. And so we started prototyping with tool use, and that's kind of ultimately what led us to getting involved in the OpenAI original ChatGPT plugin launch. And I think really sort of accelerated Zapier's awareness into AI. And from there, kind of just snowballed on awareness, and users were coming to us and telling us what they wanted to do. And, now we've got like, I don't know, 4 or 5. I mean, we got AI pretty much across the entire product. We have several dedicated AI products as well. It all kind of started from that original kind of moment of.
Got it. And how did you encourage the average employee as Zapier to actually use Zapier AI or like any other AI tool? Yeah. Or like, it's just like, yeah. How did you do it?
I was looking at the numbers that we're over like 50% of the company still is using AI tools on a daily basis at Zapier. Mm-hmm. And I've been interviewing a lot of like executives, or at least I probably did this last year more than I've done it this year. But when I was meeting a lot of executives on this AI stuff, a lot of them sort of had like a sort of a finger in the air. They're like, I think a lot of people are using AI tools in our company, but I'm not totally sure. And I actually know like for sure because I can look at the usage of AI features on Zapier. And that is actually what I just cited. So it's like 50% of Zapier employees use Zapier AI like on the platform on a daily basis. So they have these automations that AI is like a part of the middle of. And so I can say that with some degree of confidence. Now, yeah, I think your question is still valid of like, well, how did you get that? And one of the things that we did, and this was the week between when GPT-4 came out and the plugin store came out, there was like a 1 week window, if you remember back to like March of 2023. Mm-hmm. And Wade, myself, Brian, we went to the company and just said, hey, we're going to have a code red moment on AI. Like this is Zapier's future. I think we all saw it at that point. Like, Zapier's an automation company, but like, man, AI, like we're an AI company. We just aren't acting like it yet. And we went to the company and said, code red. Now, we don't expect everyone sees this yet, but we think this is going to happen. And if we want to have a chance to sort of help our customers and help our users learn how to use these AI tools and build them into automation and get a lot of business value and productivity value from them, we need to be the first adopters. And so we went to everyone and said, code red, we've got this upcoming hackathon and we're going to change it. We had this like week set for like early April, I think, and we said, we're not going to do that anymore. Instead, everyone in the company, like you get the week off basically from your day job. And all we want you to go do is learn how to use AI tools. That's it. And it doesn't need to be a Zapier. Just go learn how to use these tools and figure them out. Because if, in order to benefit our customers, we have to have the knowledge of how to use them ourselves. And so I can see that I can actually chart this like adoption of usage on Zapier AI. And, it's like literally an S curve where the like steepest slope of the S goes right through the week where we had that hackathon. And it really sort of forced a lot of internal figuring it out. I think these are things most companies that are adopting tools have had to figure out over the last, 18, 24 months of what's our security and privacy policy? How do we allow usage over private data, right? All the considerations folks went through, we kind of went through in like a very focused, finite, like 1 week period. And we just got it all figured out because we said this is like must happen now. And that's really, I think, accelerated the sort of ability for us to build, hopefully useful AI tools for our users and customers.
Yeah, I love that because most companies like the security department is like super risk averse and it takes like a while for AI tools to get adopted. I mean, I think the reality is that like all the employees are just using
it's like, existential. It's an existential opportunity, existential risk. So I think when you're first staring into the abyss, you can get a lot done.
Yeah, got it. Makes sense.
I think more companies should probably think that way. Actually, I think not enough probably do. I think that like, the advent of AGI, which we don't have yet, but like when we do, like I think most folks still underestimate the degree of progress we will see in purely like digital realms. So things where, the world of bits. And I think people still kind of way overestimate the degree of progress we're going to see in the world of atoms once we have AGI, because the first version of AGI, like, is going to be information constrained. And like, what are the systems where you can go create, generate, or collect information fast? It's going to be in the world where you can model it digitally. Either it's digital software, you're primarily rate limited by, CPU clock cycle, network bandwidth, things like that. Whereas in the real world, you're sort of rate limited by very different things, right? You're sort of rate limited by like, can I convince a venture capitalist to invest in my company and, buy some equipment from, overseas and ship it here and buy office space? Like, there's just very different sort of rate limiters in play. And I think that's one thing most folks don't realize or don't fully acknowledge yet. I think once we have weak and strong forms of AGI existing.
All right, Mike. So let's talk about let's take a quick tour of the different functions in tech and like how they can use AI to really like save a lot of time.
Let's do it.
Let's start with like product managers. Like, how can product managers use AI?
I'm going to give you like a high level rule of like, here's the general form of how Zapier, like across Zapier is using it. And then I'm going to ground it to be specific, because I think you're going to hear a similar answer across all, and it's worth just like getting the general answer. So I think the like most useful thing that we've found internally for language models across Zapier that's like the majority of folks are using is to parse and handle and work with unstructured text. So wherever your business is getting inbound data where it's highly unstructured is really, I think, one of the like newest opportunities to use language models. Do analysis, feature extraction, summarization, drafting responses to. These are the kind of use cases that are not possible with Zapier 4 years ago, right? These are the types of unique use cases that AI can do. There's lots of Zapier can do that just like AI, like kind of is just an alternative way to do. But this like handling of unstructured text is one of the really special new use cases. So you asked like product management. One of the cool ones we had here was when we first launched this product called AI Actions, which is a developer toolkit for allowing you to plug the Zapier like tool library into your own like LLM products. When we first launched this thing, we had some evals that we had built for it. And we didn't even really know how good it was when we launched it. We kind of launched it originally on just vibe checks, getting a beta out there. And it turned out the first version was actually not very good. In fact, I think the accuracy was something like 30%, 40% accurate. It was like really bad and low. Yeah. But we had scoring on it. We had thumbs up, thumbs down with like text boxes attached to every single sort of transaction. We got feedback from users on, was this a good sort of translation of a user request or utterance into a tool or not? And we had all that data that like thumbs up, thumbs down was just getting plumbed into like a database table somewhere, maybe a Google Sheet or a Django admin, something like that. And then we built a Zap that picked up all of that, each transaction, each record, and we looked over it nightly. And we said, let's collect the last 24 hours of all of our feedback. And then we had an LM summarize all of the issues that we had collected over the last 24 hours into basically like priority and summary, and then give the raw links attached as well. And we dumped that into a Slack channel along with the overall eval score that we had, because we had this like eval running against all the feedback we were collecting. And then we pumped that into a Slack channel that was like, the engineering and product management on this project. And over the course of about 2-3 months, based on sort of that workflow, just literally just looking at the feedback we were getting on a nightly basis and trying to react to it as best as we could, we were able to get accuracy from somewhere around like, it was sub 50% all the way up to like 80-90% accurate in just a few months. And so we're like, that's a job that like totally could be done by human. It's just like it's a large data processing and understanding job that certainly was like much easier and happened with a higher degree of quality because we were able to sort of use this like AI summarization step in the middle there.
Yeah. And I guess the same AI summarization can be applied to like, sales and marketing, like, transcribing sales calls.
Oh yeah. I got to tell you about our like go-to-market stuff here, because it's really cool. So this is probably the one spot we're like making the most direct dollars from, actually, is on the go-to-market side with AI. So we use HubSpot, probably no surprise there, as our CRM. We also use Gong, which is a sales call transcription tool. And so when our sales reps, here's the sort of, the process of old was sales reps would wrap up their calls and they would spend the next 10 to 15 minutes reviewing back over either their notes, the transcript, their memory, and trying to do extraction over to these like custom fields that we had set up in HubSpot that we thought were important to know about, assessing how likely is this particular lead to buy, what are their blockers, what information do we need to get them, what are the next steps, all these kinds of sort of meta signals. And every morning, our sales managers wake up and they're looking over our HubSpot funnel, trying to answer who are the customers that I should go spend time with today? And they're trying to find the folks that are sort of the most likely to purchase, that have the biggest, easiest blockers to resolve. You want to book the revenue that you can book generally in sort of a sales funnel. And so this process is sort of dependent on the quality of the data that you actually get into HubSpot. And unfortunately, this manual transcription job, like the 10 to 15 minute wrap up documentation from every sales rep to do every call, is one of the least favorite things that sales reps do, because it is like the most error prone. It's the most grindy. Like you want to be talking to people, right? Like that's the fun part of the job, is figuring out how to solve their problems, not like transcribing junk into a database table. And so we've got this whole process now where every time a sales Gong call wraps up, we automatically get the transcript coming off of the Gong side, feed that into some LLM steps where we do feature extraction over it. We grab out, lead name, email, company, propensity to buy, blockers, what integrations and apps do they care about, who else matters on the team, all these like signals, automatically fill it in HubSpot. Sales reps don't have to spend any time after calls then sort of manually entering that data. And our sales reps, our managers then in the morning, get a much higher quality signal and like up-to-date, accurate view of the funnel to sort of go mine over. So, you're probably giving like sales reps back 15% of their maybe time even, just actually spend more time with customers. And then you're also booking additional revenue because our sales reps are actually knowing what are the leads that are actually the right people to spend with.
That's crazy. So you probably like save 6 figures, 7 figures just to do this?
At one point I calculated it last year. I haven't gone back and updated the number yet, but yeah, it was like hundreds of thousands of dollars on our in additional revenue with this setup.
Yeah, I totally agree, man. I think that's like my number one use case. Just copy and pasting, even like long Slack threads, internal Slack threads. Like I don't want to read all this shit. Like it's like copy paste it. Like, hey, why did this person tag me on this like 15 messages Slack thread? Like tell me what's going on. It's really good for synthesizing everything. Yeah.
Come back to the other point. We all just want computers to do the grindy work for us. They don't have to, right? So I think that's the promise of this stuff.
Do you also use it in your personal life? Like, do you
AI tools? The main thing that I use, like a lot of our AI tools that I use, across like ChatGPT and Claude and some Zapier tools built in here, is primarily around learning new things. I find that these like large language models are are extraordinarily learning and teaching tool, particularly like learning new code base, for example. I was picking up Jax this past summer, which is a sort of flavor of PyTorch, where it's kind of I don't know how much details you care to know about this, but suffice to say, it's a very different way to think about how to do machine learning and training models. And it requires a mental reshift. And I didn't get it at first. I kind of knew the promise of it, but it's a completely sort of different API surface area and has a lot of quirks and catches that don't exist in sort of the underlying PyTorch style libraries. And so I spent a lot of time with tools like with ChatGPT, with Claude, to get a handle on the sort of API shape and space, understand the gotchas. Now, it can't actually write code for you. I think this is like, you're going to see this in every case. It's like, you're not actually going to get, like, if all you want is like code that matches a tutorial that's somewhere on the internet, you'll be able to get that. But as soon as you sort of step one degree of like complication, like away from it, generally you're going to start being more skeptical about whether it's going to be valid or not. And in all my cases, it never was, but it gave me the right sort of like style sense and shape, and kind of helped me understand, okay, here's the next important question to ask, and kind of get to the frontier of knowledge there. And so that's probably my personal number one use case for all these AI systems and tools, is just accelerating my learning into domains that I am unfamiliar with.
And you just like have a conversation with it, or like you paste in the documentation, or just kind of chat with it?
It's more, for me personally, it's more targeted than that, like more surgical, right? Like I have a very narrow, specific question. Like I'm generally going to read documentation directly from somewhere online. But I will often then, once I've like sort of sat down to parse the documentation, and I have like a project plan in my head of like, okay, well, here's what I'm actually trying to do. I will then sort of have a very targeted initial question of like, okay, show me an example of how to do this. And that like initial stop, like going from 0 to 1, I find, it's much easier to like work within an existing code base when you're learning than it is to write 0 to 1 code. Writing 0 to 1 code requires a really quite deep fundamental understanding of like what you're doing and the sort of programming toolkit you're working with. And if you don't have that, it's much easier to work within an existing code base. So like, I think you can accelerate your sort of initial like, productivity by, letting these things at least go 0 to 1. And then even if it's not quite, it's maybe like 3/4 of 1, it's not all the way there. You can sort of start using it as a starting point to sort of figure out, okay, how do I get from that to 1? And along the way, you're sort of learning some of the key concepts, and you're getting familiar with the syntax, you're getting familiar with the shape of the API libraries. It gives you starting spots for all it.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's like, it's much easier to edit a draft blog post and to like write from scratch. It's the same kind of principle. Yeah.
For what it's worth, I'm very different from my co-founder, Brian. Like he is a very prolific, like cursor, Visual Studio completion using language models to like do autocomplete and stuff like that. He has a very different workflow than I do in terms of how to leverage language models for like programming and coding and stuff. And I've tried to do his and it hasn't like worked as well. He's tried to do mine and like he hasn't. So I think there's actually some like different personal preferences of like how people learn and work that, they find different tools. So it's kind of worth experimenting with different patterns.
I mean, that's also like kind of one of the big benefits of AI. It can give like really personalized education based on your preferences. It's not like a classroom where like everyone's learning the same thing. Yeah.
Figure out what works for you, right? You kind of have to have tried enough stuff to know, okay, this is what I like. But yeah, I definitely agree with that statement.
Yeah. I was at a panel with Kevin and Mike from like Anthropic and OpenAI yesterday. And like, there was a really good quote that they said about like how, AI is already intelligent, but you got to teach it how to do things. Like it's already smart. You just got to give it the right instructions so it can actually do stuff for you. Yeah.
We can debate that definition, which we should. But I'll accept it at face value for the purpose of this conversation.
Okay. All right, cool. Let's talk about like AI agents. Like, like you said, the promise is like, just get AI to order a pizza for me or like get AI to do stuff for me without me having to be there. Like how do you think that's almost here? Or like, I mean, in some ways, Zapier is kind of like a mini AI agent, but like how close are we to AI agents that can actually like do stuff without supervision, like do a lot more complicated tasks, I guess?
Yeah, I think I could give like let me give like an overview because I think Zapier is kind of like interesting to consider in this sort of agent world or not. Agents are for what's worth a very overloaded term. Even in Zapier, like I think back in 2023, I said, you can't use the word agent anymore. You have to be more specific because like everyone was using it and had a different sort of context loaded up. So let me talk about from an automation standpoint. I think there's like two kind of broad categories of automation that exist in the world. One is API-based automation. This is what Zapier does. There's quite a few competitors at this point to Zapier, but I'll categorize it as like API-based automation. And then there's another type of automation that is what's called like robotic process automation is the industry name for RPA. It's basically keyboard and mouse automation. If you want to think we're computer use. If you're going to, it's a more friendly name that Anthropic came up with recently, I think, for the Claude model. But these are very distinct types of agent automation, if you want to think about them. And they have like pros and cons. The API-based automation, this is what Zapier does. It's very permission-oriented, right? You have to go get API keys. So you're sort of working with the API that third-party vendors have given you, right? And said, hey, here's how we want robots to work with our service. And so it's like very, upfront, there's a partnership agreement, you get API keys, but it's also way more reliable. The API space is much smaller, so it's simpler to create automations over. And this is why Zapier, without any AI to date, or, up till 2022 or 3, was able to sort of get as many users as we did because like the shape of the API is relatively small. We can build it into some pretty nice UX, I think, to let non-technical users work with it. The downsides of it are that the API is limited. The APIs you get from, say, Salesforce or HubSpot or Slack, these are not perfect APIs to everything you can do with those products. They are actually narrow. And this is where RPA gets, potentially exciting. RPA historically has been generally quite fragile and hard to set up. The sort of main UiPath is like an example of like one of the more famous, I think, RPA companies in the past. And their primary audience they sell to is like legacy IT and engineering organizations who are trying to automate, like COBOL code from the 90s. That's like running on a mainframe server somewhere that no one wants to touch because no one knows how it works anymore. And it's easier to like slap a UI automation layer and like literally have a sort of software drive a mouse and keyboard around the interface and like click this like legacy software instead of trying to like re-engineer it in a more modern, language or framework or anything like that. And so it tends to be, just due to the sort of nature of the technology without any AI, it tends to be very hard to set up because you have to like literally like, follow my mouse and keyboard and copy this sequence of patterns. It tends to be very fragile because you imagine automating like a Windows box or a Mac laptop or something. Well, what happens when you like close the lid? It's like, okay, well, it stops working. Or what happens if you get like a system, permission pop up at some point, or it says, hey, you need to update your software. Like, well, if like generally those like RPA based automations are very, very fragile and they're just going to break. And so like it generally is like an order of magnitude harder to set RPA up than API automation. And it's generally an order of magnitude like harder to maintain them compared to API based automation. And so I think that's why generally like Zapier and the API based has sort of won the day so far. Now, importantly, I've sort of described the world without AI. I do think that like this RPA based sort of future is a much better one if we can figure out how to get it to work, because you get sort of the full, you get the full interface. You get the full, anything that a sort of human could do with a given piece of software, whether it's in a browser or on a desktop or on your phone, anything where humans could do it is actually part of the API, or the sort of like the interface spec, basically. You could have it operate over there. Whereas, with more API based, it's very permission oriented, and, you're never going to get the sort of full version that you can do. So I think like that's kind of the world today. That's absolutely the future. My belief today is that we need weak forms of AGI in order to get the reliability and the setup ease of use high enough on, let's call it the RPA style of automation, in order to bring consumer products to market on that. I think you could look at Rabbit, that product that came out last year, the little orange, thing.
Yeah.
So like, I think that actually was a consumer RPA product, right? They were trying to create an automation layer, a point and click automation layer over Android apps that were running on a remote server. And that's what they were trying to do. And it's just a really hard problem to do when language models like require a ton of like still domain specific prompting. They're not truly generalizable because they don't truly understand any of the underlying concept they're working with. They're just pattern matching. And so to the degree that you can engineer pattern matching, even in somewhat of a narrow domain, it can work, but it requires a lot of effort. But certainly within the realm of possibility now. But the full version, I think we all want, can work with any app, learn anything I can give it. Well, frankly, like learning is actually not one of sort of language model specializations today. So it's not very good at the current AI is actually quite bad at learning new skills.
We talk about AGI now. When you say weak AGI, like what do you mean? Like have you tried the computer use thing from Claude?
So I think it's probably like definitions are actually really quite important here. And I think the two most commonly accepted definitions of AGI are either one, I know it when I see it. I'm not even going to worry about defining it because it's like undefinable in some way, or, it's not worth debating. I sort of disagree with this. Definitions are important because we can turn them into benchmarks, and benchmarks we can measure for progress. So I actually think definitions are useful. Now, one definition that is used right now quite often in sort of AI industry is the one that OpenAI and Microsoft like put in their contract from a couple years back, where they said AGI is a system that can outperform humans at the majority of economically useful work, or something to the thrust of this. And I also think this is not a great definition of AGI because I think it is actually one that narrow AI systems can do today without actually having AGI. In fact, there was an article a couple weeks ago where they were trying to it was reported that OpenAI was trying to like renegotiate that contract by, threatening to claim they already had AGI. And it's like, because it's not like the thing we have today is like, it's undefinable in that sense. So it's like not a very good definitional contract, because it's perhaps you can accomplish that goal of like automating a lot of economically useful work without actually having intelligence. I think you can do it through purely the sort of language model, memorization or near-time generalization regime that you get from them. So I think I'll cut to the answer here. I think the right definition of AGI is one that Francois Chollet coined back in 2019 in his paper on measure of intelligence. And it is a system that can efficiently learn how to learn new skill and apply it to new open-ended problems. So efficiency is a really important definition. And this idea of learning new skills is a really important problem. And here's the thought experiment to like ground this. So, AI versus AGI. We've had AI systems for years now that can outperform humans, OpenAI definition, at games of skill like Go or chess or poker. And how do researchers and engineers accomplish this? Well, they have to start over from zero every single time, right? They have to invent new architectures. They have to go invent new search algorithms often. They have to go collect new data. They have to sometimes reach new levels of scale in order to accomplish those feats. The important thing is every time they're starting over, though, in each domain. And this is in direct contrast to you, Peter, right? I mean, I could sit you down here and probably teach you a new card game in probably a few hours, maybe a new board game in a few days, and get you up to human level proficiency on it. And that I think is really the hallmark of what makes you generally intelligent, is your ability to rapidly and efficiently learn that new skill. And learn any new skill. It's not just a card game or board. It's like any new skill I could sit you down and teach you, and you'd be able to sort of pick it up quite quickly and apply it towards new problems that you would never sort of encounter before in your life. And that is what no one knows how to get computers to do today. That is AGI. And so when I say weak forms of AGI, I think the first forms of AGI we're going to see are likely going to be quite inefficient. It will be on the spectrum of efficiency of like learning new skill and apply it, but I think it's going to be very weak. It may take days to learn new tasks. It may be very slow. It may need still like a sort of large degree of, training data relative to what humans do. But I suspect the sort of spectrum of efficiency is going to be the one that like gets better and better over time, and is probably the main gradient of how we'll get from weak AGI up to a stronger AGI.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like, like with the game of Go, like it was just trained on like millions of Go games or something, right?
Training, there's also search. This was how chess was beaten in the 90s, right? It's largely a search algorithm that was how those games initially got defeated. There was a paper that came out just a few weeks ago that I think maybe from Google or someone who trained just a really large AI model on just pure pre-training alone that was able to beat chess. So like, I think this sort of fits within the same regime of how large language models work, which is, the paradigm of deep learning, even more fundamentally than just language models, is we improve system accuracy by showing them more situations and more answers, as opposed to
that's right.
The orthogonal dimension of actually measuring their ability to learn that skill with efficiency and apply it towards these open-ended problems.
So you have this ARC prize thing going on. You went to many different schools, and I went to the website, and the tagline is AGI progress has stalled, new ideas are needed. Why? Can you explain why you think AGI progress is stalled, or is open AGI progress? Yeah.
So I think this claim was accurate coming into the summer. And I think that we might not be in this regime anymore. And I think there's a bunch of reasons why. So we're going to need to update, I think, that for ARC Prize 2025. But I do think it was an accurate claim coming into the summer. And the reason is because coming into the summer, basically the sort of, largest, mainline system that we could use was, GPT 4.0. And this is just a large scaled up pre-trained language model doing, a pass through the network weights, generate tokens on the outside. This is the same regime. We're basically scaling up the same regime all the way going back to GPT-2, which came out in 2019, actually around the same time that Francois published the On Measure of Intelligence paper, which is where the benchmark that ARC Prize is testing against was also introduced. And so the claim is that we really haven't seen an improvement in generalization power since 2019 at best, probably going back to 2017 with the invention of or discovery of the transformer. But we really haven't seen any generalization power improving. I think the claim would be that these systems have had the same amount of generalization power due to their fundamental architecture, but we've improved their accuracy on benchmarks by giving them more training data. But the generalization power has been fixed and constant and quite low. And that is going all the way up to the summer where we launched ARC Prize, and a couple of things happened. We launched ARC Prize. There are, I think, 4 or 5 startups that I'm aware of that are all now working on completely orthogonal research directions to deep learning to try and beat ARC Prize. And they're starting to make pretty impressive progress along these directions. In fact, I would make the claim that I think the top approaches on both the private and the public leaderboard for ARC Prize are sort of they're just not pure models. They are models plus some extra search or something interesting, something distinct and different from the deep learning paradigm that's allowing them to get these results they get. And This is quite similar to O1 now, actually, from OpenAI. Right? OpenAI kind of made this big claim when they released it that O1 is not just another large language model. In fact, it's the new paradigm to scaling, towards AGI. And so we actually tested it on ARC Prize, and it got about 20%, 21%. It's on par with Claude 3.5 Sonnet. This is about half or so the state of the art actually still on ARC. So, but even despite its kind of middling score, I do believe that O1 is truly the biggest improvement in generalization power we've seen in a commercial model going all the way back to GPT-2. This idea of being able to do test time search, where they're allowing the model to not just generate one chain of thought, but multiple and search over them, do backtracking, allows these models to more sort of fully kind of navigate the situation space around the prompt that the user was given. Now, I think there's a debate of is it AGI? And I would claim no. I think there's one thing that's really missing from it that conceptually limits it from reaching AGI, at least by this definition, the way I just shared, which is it's still operating over the pre-training distribution that it was fundamentally trained on. And, the way they did this was they went and generated lots of synthetic change of thought over, formal domains like math and code and programming and things like that. There was likely informal pre-training as well, things maybe like goal to sub-goal breakdown that got sort of scored by humans. They used that signal as a reward signal for the pre-train. But you're still fundamentally limited by what data got put into the pre-train here. And I think in order to at least conceptually relax the constraints on your architecture sufficiently, you both need some form of test time search, like what O1 is doing, like what a lot of the top scores on ARC Prize are doing. And you need the ability to incorporate information from test time back into your model and carry it forward, right? You need the ability to sort of make contact with reality and learn from it. instead of having to learn from it sort of every single time. And this is something I think AlphaProof from DeepMind actually does. They have a combination of both test time fine tuning plus this like search mechanism and inference time. And so all of this landed like this summer. We got O1, we got AlphaProof, we've got a ton of like frontier approaches now that are way more than just language models, sort of at the top of the ArcPrize leaderboard. So I think it's actually a really exciting time in sort of the field of like generality research. I think ArcPrize has hopefully played a small role in helping catalyze some of that to happen as well.
That's amazing, man. Like, what are some companies that we should check out that's part of ArcPrize? You said there's like a couple of companies that are leading this research.
Yeah, two that are on the top of the leaderboard that are worth talking about probably, or that I know that I can talk about are the top of the public leaderboards. It's actually this guy, his name's Ryan Greenblatt. It's a really interesting approach where he's using GPT-4o. The public leaderboard doesn't have the prize money attached, but it lets you use commercial models like OpenAI. He's using GPT-4o to prompts it for like 2,000 Python programs for each puzzle. And then he searches over the Python puzzles or programs to like look for ones that match the puzzles, and then he applies it. And then the other team on the private leaderboard, the one that's actually in the lead right now for the prize money, is this team called Minds AI. It's actually a super team. This was a team of 3 people that were individually working on Arc for the last couple of years separately. And after we launched ArcPrize, they sort of joined forces into like one team to kind of, pull together all their insights and thinking together. And they've actually made a ton of progress this summer from doing that. And they're doing something quite different to Ryan. They're doing this test time fine tuning thing where they pre-train I think it's like a code gen model from Salesforce, like a very small model, 200 million parameters. They pre-train it on a bunch of Arc puzzles. And then inside Kaggle, which is the competition platform we're using, they fine tune their pre-trained model with the private puzzles that they get exposed to. And so they're making their system sort of has found a way to sort of, relax or they found a way to make contact with that reality, incorporate some understanding of reality back into the model, into the distribution for when they're prompting it. And, they're doing, of course, a lot more bells and whistles than just that, but that's like the sort of thrust of what they're doing. And I should mention, the goal of the contest is that in order to win any of the prize money, you have to open source your code. And so by the end of this year, we expect to have, new open source code from at least 5, maybe 7 different teams that are working on Arc, and hopefully use that to re-baseline everyone working on it going into next year to make it more likely we can figure this thing out.
Yeah, it's really impressive to see like just some random person like Ryan beating out O1 preview on some of these big models. That's great. Like,
Ryan is a fantastic prompt engineer. He's probably one of the best people in the world at figuring out how to like get language models to do interesting things.
And these are college students or no? They're like
Ryan works at like a research firm in SF, and then Minds AI folks all have like pretty different backgrounds. I think one of them has like a psychology background, like not sort of like at big AI tech lab scaling the next trillion parameter model or something like that. They're all folks that have pretty interesting, unique journeys.
Yeah, so that's a great segue into like how can really smart kids or like people just want to switch careers like get ahead of this like AGI thing that's coming, or like actually have a career. Like, should I know how to fix toilets, or like is it what are
I think the sort of tactically, if you're interested in AI, it's easier to answer this question I think from someone who's like kind of interested in getting into AI in the first. One of the things that I spent a lot of time talking with like college students over the last year or so with ArcPrize, and one of the more disappointing things that I sometimes heard, and this was more true going into the summer, was like, man, it feels like AI is already all figured out, and I don't really want to go work on it because there's nothing else I can contribute. We're just like scaling this thing up. We're just going to reach AGI, and like almost sort of this mindset of defeatism, right? And on one hand, like I don't kind of blame them because they're getting beaten over the head by this narrative from all these like major hyperscalers. Oh, like, no, we got it all figured out. Don't compete with us. We're just going to like scale our way up. You need data centers with nuclear power to be able to like build this stuff. And like, sure. If that's true, like, yeah, okay, I get it. But I think things like Arc, the benchmark, demonstrate there are tasks that are extraordinarily easy and simple and straightforward for humans to do that AI cannot do. And it's not a random happenstance that this Arc benchmark just isn't beaten yet. It's because it was fundamentally designed to subvert the very thing that deep learning is good at, which is this memorization regime. And so like, sure, while we made progress on ArcPrize this year, we're up 20% now from the start of the contest in June. We don't have the core ideas yet to get to the grand prize solution. So I think there is still a lot of fertile ground for individual people, students, researchers, early graduates, people that just want to like try and make an impact like we are still like idea bound and conceptually constrained to get to AGI. Again, no one in the world knows how to build a computer that can efficiently learn new skill and solve open-ended problems that has not been trained on. So if that's an exciting problem for you and you want to get into it, I guess I would just say like jump in, because we're not just on the path ahead is not all figured out yet.
Yeah, that's actually like, I'm really glad you're out there telling that story, because I think the general public just thinks like, you gotta buy like a shit ton of NVIDIA chips and like you gotta spend a lot of money to even compete here. Like,
I think like it kind of, I think if you zoom out enough on the public consciousness, like progress is progress, right? You just zoom out, or I might check this thing out once every 6 months. Maybe I use it, maybe I don't. It hasn't had a sort of material impact on my day-to-day life, but like businesses seem to use it. And like, that's kind of the vibe check, you sort of get over this stuff. And, on that side, I don't know that the technical details on the architecture, the benchmarks really matter that much. I think if you zoom out on a long enough time horizon, this stuff's going to just feel like it's going to keep getting better and better, as long as we actually keep focusing on the right problems to solve them. And I think that's the point that ARC is trying to make, is that like most of the industry is oriented in the wrong direction, or at least it has been. I think we're finally starting to see some course correction here. But over the last like 3 years of scaling, 4 years of scaling a particular paradigm around deep learning, it's really over-rotated. Like in 2023, there was, I don't know, something like 200 billion by my count invested into language model startups, and maybe like 100 million into AGI startups doing new stuff. Like it was like 100-to-1 sort of attention funding disparity ratio. And so I think that's kind of the reaction we're trying to have, is like, hey, we want ArcPrize to be a sort of North Star for AGI and have it always be pointing in the right research direction towards it to increase the chance that we actually get this thing. That's one of my fundamental beliefs, is like we should seek to try and accelerate to this discovery. It's one of the most important ones I think we can ever sort of get to. And, it's just kind of frustrating to see like, we have this like counterexample that's really important, and most of the world isn't aware of it. And like, we're all over-rotated on an approach that's never going to solve it. And that's that's the core mission of ArcPrize.
Do you think like OpenAI and some of these other companies are like doing the same thing internally? Like, because they're trying to reach AGI too, right? Like, I think they have the same approach, or
same approach in what sense?
Like they're not just trying to scale the existing LLM, they're trying to
I know this definitively. I mean, you can just go read like Noam Brown's tweets. Head of reasoning and planning at OpenAI. And Noam's an interesting fellow, because he was one of the people who is probably most individually responsible for building those really great AI systems that can outperform humans. I think he started out on poker. He might have done a couple of the games. He did diplomacy at Meta when he was there. And I was listening to a podcast with him, I think it was last year before he joined OpenAI. And I think he had this quote, something I'll paraphrase, which was like, I don't think games of skill are interesting anymore for AI. It's a solved problem. And, what we don't know how to do is this other sort of, general form of like reasoning and working over many different domains. And, now he's working as the head of reasoning and planning at OpenAI. And so like, I know for sure that a lot of the labs are trying to like figure this out. I think DeepMind's another pretty impressive lab. I think AlphaProof is maybe one of the systems in the world today that's closest to like AGI, just in terms of its, it has ability to do search plus test time fine tuning. It's still limited to like a formal domain with lean, the math proving theorem. But, it's kind of funny, like, AlphaProof and sort of O1 kind of have some very different pros and cons, right? AlphaProof is sort of figured out some really important things around generality, but it's very constricted to like a formal domain of reasoning with lean. Whereas O1 works over unstructured text, but maybe is not quite as good at doing the formal reasoning. And so they're both trying to like get to each other's spot today. So I do think that there's certainly a lot of like frontier research on all these. I think we're at the spear tip of research. We're past, we're just going to go train a model bigger than GPT-4.
That's great. So just to close on this, like when you say just jumping, like what do you mean by just jumping? Like just start contributing to ArcPrize, or is there prerequisites?
Not to sort of, talk my own book too much here, but like, I think ArcPrize is not a bad place to get started. If you want to, like, if you are curious, here's the frame I'll give for it. If you are curious what this benchmark looks like that has resisted every single language model that has been invented over the last 5 years. Remember, this benchmark was created in 2019 before LLMs even existed. It was created as a response to deep learning, not LLMs. And it has resisted every amount of scale that we've been able to throw at with LLMs. If that's just not a little bit like curious, if your curiosity is sparked and you're like, what is that benchmark? Go to arcprize.org. There are some puzzles in the benchmark. It's a very visual benchmark that you can do as a human to get a feel for the data set. Go check it out. You can take some of these things and just like, I think you might be surprised at the degree of simplicity and the degree of straightforwardness of the actual, tasks that are in the benchmark. And if you're curious to then go further, there's a really good technical guide on the website. You can get started, kind of start to read about the benchmark, and even some open source code. You can get started running it on Kaggle and on your own machine to get started in the contest.
Awesome. Well, I mean, it's good that there's at least, I'm seeing this graph. It's good that at least in this area, humans are still way more advanced than any kind of AI system so far. But yeah, hopefully if ArcPark succeeds, it will catch up quickly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, Mike. Yeah, this is a super awesome conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Peter. It was always exciting to chat about this stuff.